If anybody has seen me climbing, they will say my climbing style is struggle. Like, that's basically what I'm doing on the rock, like continuously struggling. I would say I kind of like relish in the struggle.
Hey y'all, welcome to the Struggle Climbing Show. It's me, Ryan. I'm your host. How are you? I hope you're doing great. I hope you're having an awesome week, an awesome year. It's February. It's the shortest month of the year. February can be a bit of a drag. I hope you're making it through. And to help you, guys, we got a good conversation here today with the one and only Pete Whittaker. We've waited a long time to have Pete on the show here, but it was worth the wait because he really brought the goods here today. Not only did he bring a ton of insight, but he also brought some really great stories. We laughed, we cried, and we learned a lot. Maybe we didn't cry. But Pete did share a story about where he was the closest he's ever been to crying en route. It was pretty gripping. So we laughed, we talked about crying, and we definitely embraced the struggle on this one. You guys, I'm sure you're aware of Pete. I don't need to go through his insanely long list of accomplishments. He is the absolute best in the world at what he does. And what he does is crack, off-width, and mixed climbing at the absolute highest degree. I'm talking bold, trad, bouldering, whatever it is. You can throw it all at Pete. He's going to take it on. Some of his top accomplishments, I'll just click off a few right here so they can refresh your memory before we get into this conversation. Obviously, he and his longtime partner, Tom Randall, did Century Crack. That's kind of what exploded them onto the scene. And then from there, they just kind of charged on. Pete has climbed some of the hardest crack and mixed climbs in the world and established them as well. I'm talking about Recovery Drink and Crown Royale, which are at the same cliff, and are really cool crack/mixed climbs that go, God, what are they, 8B plus to 8C plus, or 8C and 8C plus? They're friggin' hard. That's like 14C, guys. Also, he did last year Stranger Than Fiction, which is a climb that Tom's been working on out in Moab as well. It's a Mason Earl line. It's only seen a couple ascents. Mason and then Lor Sabarin and Pete, I think, are the only ascents on that one. Anyway, there's loads more. Pete is an absolute monster, and he's also incredibly humble. Maybe too humble? I think maybe he's too humble, taking into account all that he has done as a climber. But that's really refreshing. There's something really cool about that with our sport. There's just like so much humility, and he shares some incredible stories. He's been climbing his whole life, and he's just learned so much along the way. So if trad climbing interests you, if crack climbing interests you, if getting stronger interests you, because as Pete shares, that's one of his struggles is strength and power, he opens up about all that here today, and you're going to walk away from this conversation with just a ton of beta and ideas to get better and get more enjoyment out of your climbing. Speaking of getting better at your climbing, or at least I'm trying to get better at my climbing, my training and my climbing are going great. You guys know that I am jumping into this Road to V8 challenge this year, as well as my Road to the Pyramid, and I've been going after all of them with gusto. I've been getting out to the red and building a lot of volume on routes out there when I can, when weather permits, and I've just been hammering it at the gym, spending a lot of time on the board and doing a lot of strength and power work. So yeah, I'm like fatigued as shit, but I guess that's just kind of where we are in a winter training block. I hope you're getting after it with your training and your climbing and having a lot of fun. And one little thing that I want to shout out here is that I'm going to be in Portland March 6th, 7th, and 8th to do some filming and some climbing with Emil Abrahamson over at the Portland Rock Gym. It's their new facility out there. It's the biggest gym in the country. I'm so hyped to spend some time with Emil out there, but also to spend some time with you out there. So keep an eye on my Instagram, and I'm going to announce some more specifics around that. But I think we're going to do a climb around on March 7th. With me and Emil for Struggle listeners, where we can just like hang out, climb. Maybe you can be part of some of the videos that we're shooting out there. We're going to be doing like a grip competition and a little mini comp. We'll have prizes. It's going to be rad, and I would love to see you. So mark your calendars. March 6th, 7th, 8th. It's going to land somewhere in there. I think March 7th is the magic date. So if you're going to be in the Pacific Northwest, I would love to see you. Okay, enough of that business. Let's get into this conversation here with Pete because it's so damn good. And by the way, there's an incredible bonus episode that if you're a patron or Apple subscriber that you get access to as well. And I'll tell you more about that at the end here. But first, let's get wide and jam into this conversation here with the one and only Pete Whittaker. Dude, this is a long time in the making. I'm excited about this.
Yeah, it's going to be good.
You know, it's interesting. I've been deep into an edit of a day that I spent with Tom Randall. So I'm very much like in this quirky, wacky, wide boys world right now in post-production. So, you know, it's really refreshing actually to be able to talk with you instead of hearing Tom all day in my ears like I have been.
I was going to say you've had Tom on quite a lot, haven't you?
Yeah,
like on the show.
Too much. It's very imbalanced. The wide boys, we're starting to correct it here. We should probably do a 5-hour episode right now, and then that would just level the playing.
Yeah, exactly.
But yeah, dude, I'm really excited about this, and I'm hyped. You got a lot going on. Where are you at home right now?
Yes, I'm at home in Norway. So, yeah, living out here these days.
What's it like? We're recording this right now. It's January, so is it pretty bleak out there?
It was up until yesterday. It was all snow, really cold, really nice, like highs, you know, ice climbing the other day, frozen waterfalls, kind of really good actually. And then yesterday it just started pouring down. The temperature went up by maybe 10 degrees, everything melted, things were starting to flood because there was just so much snow. So now it's gone back to proper Bergen weather.
Do you still get out in that stuff? I mean, I know you like to embrace the suck. I mean, some of these expeditions you've had, which we're going to get into in this conversation here, are not like the epitome of comfort. But when it's really, you know, melting and coming down, and like the conditions are, you know, for most of us, we might just say, yeah, this is a gym session day. Are you still pushing yourself outside?
No, it's a gym session day.
Good.
No, it totally is. It totally is. Yeah. I mean, to be honest, if I'm here, like in Bergen over the winter months, then I often see that as kind of like a training period, to be honest. And whilst I might go outside a little bit, it's kind of like a knuckle down, do some training over the winter months, maybe get some nice days of ice climbing or a few days of skiing or something or whatever. But it's kind of, waiting for spring to come. Yeah,
for sure. Do you get psyched on that? Do you get psyched on like, you know, kind of understanding like, hey, this is a training period. I'm going to get focused.
Oh yeah, I definitely have that. Or I have done over the last number of years for sure. Yeah. And it's quite nice to just sort of have that period and then you just like, okay, this is what I'm focusing on for the next 3 months. And you have it planned out and then you just go for it, don't you?
Oh, yeah.
That's what I like. Yeah.
Well, we're going to get into all that. You're familiar with the chapters of the show here because you've heard the show. So let's start where we always start here, Pete. Someone who doesn't seem to be much of a stranger to struggle. You seem to, in fact, really embrace the struggle. You put yourself through a lot over there, dude. So what is your relationship with struggle as a climber?
Yeah, I would say if anybody has seen me climbing, they will say my climbing style is struggle. Like that's basically what I'm doing on the rock. Like continuously struggling. I would say I kind of like relish in the struggle and I kind of seek it out and I embrace it and I enjoy the struggle.
Was it always so? Like were you like, where do you think that came from? Because we don't all have that. You know, some of us avoid the struggle more than others. I did a little bit of off-width climbing with Tom not too long ago in Moab, and man, talk about discomfort. But is that something that like, I feel like maybe I could train that or get used to it, but like, it's certainly not something that I've sought out like or relished in like it sounds like you do. And were you, you know, a little 8-year-old running around putting yourself in these like really uncomfortable positions, or is this a learned skill?
I guess I've always enjoyed that kind of, I guess there's different types of struggle though, isn't there? There's the kind of like climbing struggle, like the training struggle, the pain, or like off-width struggle or that sort of thing. But then I guess there's also other, you know, struggles in life, you could say, which you don't particularly want to seek out. But it's those fun struggles, you know, that you kind of after and you want to seek out, because when you go through that struggle, and I guess usually that struggle is towards a goal or a project or whatever it might be. And then when you go through that process and you've had that struggle, then, I mean, the harder the struggle, the longer the struggle, the sort of like sweeter it is at the end in a way. But often it's kind of like a lot with these projects that you do remember that end thing, but the harder the struggle was to get there, you kind of remember that struggle more than particularly doing the actual thing. Especially, you know, those like training moments and that kind of like grind to actually get there. So Yeah, I think it comes in different forms. It can be like a struggle over months or years, or it can be a struggle on a particular route where you're just putting 5 or 10 minutes of hardcore effort in, or that struggle over like 2 years where you're really grinding towards a hard project or something. So there's different types of struggle, isn't there, really?
Yeah, for sure. Well, we'll get into a handful of these case studies in this conversation here as we talk through some of these big projects that you've had in these expeditions. Who do you think handles struggle or discomfort better, you or Tom?
Tom's a bit of a sucker for the struggle as well, to be honest. So
Yeah, you're freaking masochist, basically.
yeah. That's a difficult one because
Like, who breaks first? You know, like one of you guys, you must have had these situations where you've been out and you've been just hammering yourselves against something, and at some point, somebody just says, "You know what? That's it. I'm out. I'm going to go get a burrito. I'm done. I can't do this anymore."
I feel like we both have a very good sort of like high threshold for that, or we never want to be the first one to say no. I mean, I can't remember anybody kind of saying no. Do you know what I mean? It would kind of just get to the point where the other person is just lying down and potentially can't go any further, you know, rather than them saying no, and then the other person might have to be like, okay, yeah, right, well, let's go home now.
It's a game of chicken. Yeah. And as soon as somebody says no, the other person's going to say, "Yeah, no, I'm out too." But you just don't. Yeah. Nobody wants to be first.
Yeah, right. Exactly. Maybe it's just that sort of stubbornness in a way as well, of not wanting to be first, and then you just put yourself further into that struggle out of stubbornness. You know, because we have climbed together quite a lot,
right?
And we're both really sort of stubborn in that way, not wanting to be first to say no. Maybe we've sort of relished in that struggle because nobody wanted to say no first, so we've just learned to deal with it.
Right.
Yeah.
That's great though, because I feel like that level of stubbornness is what can lead to excellence, right? Like if there's an easy way out, or if there's always somebody next to you saying, we don't have to push harder, we don't have to do this, then maybe you don't, right?
I guess so, yeah. I guess that all comes down to personality, but having like a long-term and good climbing partner like Tom has, I would say, has definitely sort of prevented that and helped push in that way for sure. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Do you find yourself, just as you reflect back on, you know, a really impressive career that's continuing to just go on in this upward trajectory, as you look back at what you've put yourself through mentally and physically, do you feel like you're getting better? Is there a skill to handling discomfort and struggle when you look back at training for Century Crack, which is kind of, I think, kind of the way you burst onto the scene for a lot of us, and in a couple of years in the cellar there, and a lot of discomfort, a lot of pain, I think, plenty of struggle. When you look at kind of how you handled that process to more recently, maybe this expedition to Greenland or Crown Royale, or, you know, some of these other things that you've done after many years now of being in this game, what's the difference, or how does it feel to you now compared to those earlier days?
I mean, you're always learning, like, for sure. I'm always learning how to deal with that stuff. But if I kind of think back to when I was younger, and I guess potentially before you're actually really thinking about these things as much as maybe like in an adult way. But then if I think back to like my childhood, I definitely was always that kind of person or boy just kind of like grinding it out, you know? And even it can be down to things like at school and stuff. I mean, school was all right and that was fine, but I didn't particularly love it, you know? But I wanted to do well, and I just like grinded to get good grades, and I just struggled so hard with some subjects, but still struggled, and then just got decent grades in it because I just have that sort of personality. So I guess I've just been like learning that from a young age, but it's always just been there within that personality, I think. But then as you get older and stuff, especially with like training and struggling in that way, then you learn to deal with what training pain is like. And I love getting like a good pump and a good burn in training. I mean, I think a lot of people do. Like, it just feels really good, and then after sessions, it feel like you've done something, and yeah, you kind of just you learn to love it, I think.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
you're clearly just super driven. Yeah, I think you've got that person, as you said, in other aspects of your life, it sounds like as well, whether it was school or on the business side of things with Wide Boys, with content creation, you're very driven. And we do see that, I think, as a personality trait in a lot of climbers, certainly climbers who accomplish at high levels, but also just weekend warriors like myself. I think we kind of do delight in this pushing of ourselves mentally, physically, and emotionally to do a thing. And there's quite a bit of reward on the other side when it happens. You mentioned training there, so let's dive into this training chapter, which I think is going to be very rich territory for us here. I want to talk about some specific training that you're doing. You're entering into a training block, so it's going to be fresh on the mind, but let's explore it through the lens of struggle at first. And what about training is a struggle for you, or has been? What's the hard part of training for you?
I would say, I mean, things I've always struggled with in training is definitely like basic strength and power and like bouldering, pretty much. I think as a young kid and growing up through my teenage years, I did so much of that like endurance-based aspect of climbing. And maybe I have good genetics for that. I feel like maybe I do, just through some other sort of tests and stuff that I've done around.
More slow twitch muscle than fast twitch.
Yeah, exactly. And then also because I was training that a lot through my growing years, then I think that probably had an impact on it as well.
Sure.
And then I did neglect that kind of finger strength, bouldering, power, all that kind of stuff through those years. And then coming back to it now more as an adult and over the last 10 years, I've really struggled with that side of things to pick it back up to a high level. And in my climbing, I'm always relying on my endurance and my power endurance to get me through things rather than my pure strength, power, finger strength. I feel like I'm always really low in those compared to my climbing grade and what I should be, even though I've like put a considerable amount of effort into them over the last like 8 to 10 years. I mean, pretty much all I do now is bouldering, strength work, all that kind of stuff. And I still see the progression is so slow. It's like, it's strangely frustrating, weird. Yeah.
Totally. But there is progression.
There is progression, yeah, but it's very slow. And then if I stop for just a short period of time, I'm like, oh, like it just drops off straight away. And then I really have to grind to get it back up to where it was again. Whereas I can just not do any endurance training for months. And then I just have this level of endurance, which is just ingrained in my muscles, I think. Yeah, it's very weird.
Yeah, that is cool though, just in terms of like a superpower to have that base endurance that's almost always there. Does that mean that during like a training block like we're tucking into right now, are you doing any endurance training or power endurance training even to just kind of maintain, or are you just fully focused on that strength and power?
In terms of the endurance stuff, it's probably one session per week.
Okay.
Yeah, and session doesn't mean like the full climbing session is that. It just means part of the session. I think I have a session on my program at the moment, which is maybe 40 minutes long, which is a more endurance / power endurance session.
So then the bulk of the focus on strength and power, I'd like to geek out over this for a second here because I'm just entering into this myself. And I similarly, I think I'm much more slow twitch muscle with a kind of longer, pumpier sport climbs that I like to do and that I think I'm maybe more adept at doing just kind of like off the couch, whereas I really do have to work very hard to build strength and power. So I'm throwing myself at some boards and some spray walls right now.
Yeah, we're in the same boat.
Yeah, it's plenty of struggle going on over here. So yeah, I'm curious what this training block looks like for you, or as you're focused on training up strength and power, can you kind of break down what a session and then maybe what like a day A and day B look like for you in a week, or however you schedule it out?
So I tend to not, like at the beginning of the week, I have like the sessions that I'm going to do, but I tend not to go like, oh, I'm going to do that, like this session on Monday and this session on Tuesday and Wednesday, I tend to just have the sessions I'm going to do and then go with it with how I feel on the day. So if I'm having a good session, then I might end up doing more kind of sessions, within that climbing day.
Sure.
If I'm not quite...
Sorry to interject. Are you programming this yourself, or are you working with a coach to identify each week essentially what you want to get done?
Yeah, at the moment, then I'm working with a coach
Cool.
to do that. Yeah, for each session. So they just give me like what I should do for each week, and then I just implement that into my schedule for the week, pretty much. Yeah.
So then, let's talk about how you've got this long list of things to do. You wake up, you're feeling snappy, you're feeling refreshed. Maybe yesterday was a rest day. So what does this strength and power day look like for you?
If I was feeling good and I felt like it was going to be like a big session or good day, then I would probably start with some fingerboarding, and that would be 20 minutes. So just max hangs on each arm, generally going in half crimp. I'm actually pretty good in full open hand or full crimp, and I'm really bad in that sort of middle ground. So that's what I've been working on, that sort of like chisel half crimp thing. Yeah, so cool. all my hangs are just done half crimp, pretty much.
Yeah, all of them. Okay, so you're not training two finger, or unless you're trying to win a Guinness World Record, I suppose, and then you've got,
yeah, exactly, yeah.
But aside from that, so it's you're doing like one-handed half crimp on like an edge, 20 mil or whatever. It seems to be fairly standard, and then maxing that out, and then just doing like a handful of reps.
Yeah, and for me, I have to use some assistance as well. I mean, if I'm going really, basically at my strongest, then I can do body weight hangs. But at the moment, I'm not at my strongest, so I have to use some assistance on like 20 mil edges and stuff.
Got it. So you're starting your session with that. That's essentially like, I mean, I'm sure you're doing like some sort of warm up, but then
yeah, exactly. I would do a bit of a warm up, mainly warming up the shoulders these days because they feel a bit cronky nowadays. Yeah. So yeah, warming up the shoulders, warming up the fingers a little bit. And actually, I used to do my fingerboarding sessions after my climbing, but now I've switched it around and I prefer to do them at the beginning just because I feel like you can get that quality a lot better. And actually doing a fingerboard session, I never feel like takes that much out of your fingers, and it feels like it preps you up a lot better for the bouldering session ahead. I don't know why I used to do all my fingerboarding sessions after my boulder sessions, but anyway, I've switched that around this year. So
that's interesting, and I have heard that from other athletes that I've spoken to recently, is that they've been putting some of their finger work at the front end and then going in and doing like a hard bouldering session or whatever it may be, and maybe ending the day with like some weightlifting, but not doing like hard things on the fingers. So yeah, I don't know, maybe that's just the way the science
is. I think with fingerboarding, you really need that quality, which I've noticed to get the improvements, because you don't necessarily have to do that much of it, and there's not actually that much hang time that you have to do. But I think with any training, and especially fingerboarding, I think it's really the quality of the training that you're doing and the intention of the training that you're doing. I mean, you can have all this stuff on your plan and it can say like, like doing this many reps and this many sets and, this many hangs and all that kind of stuff. But it's the intent that you do it. So are you really giving that effort when you actually get on the fingerboard and do that 7-second hang? And are you really giving that effort when you get on the board and try that problem or try that rep? And are you giving it 110%? Because you could actually just do way less training or less time training than somebody else, but you could do it with way more intent and way more focus and actually get a lot more out of it. And I think that's really important, because sometimes, I mean, I've done this myself in the past, you can feel like you're training and you go down the wall, but you've been down there 3 hours and what you've done is you've actually like sat on the mats for a bit, and then you've chatted with some mates, and then you've done some problems and you've hung on the fingerboard a little bit, and it's like, yeah, I've done some training today, but you haven't really trained with like intent, and I think that's what training is. You need to have intention and you need to have focus, but it's not just focus within the session, but focus actually when you get on the fingerboard for 7 seconds, and it's like, I'm going to flip and hold that hold for 7 seconds and make it count, because I've only got 5 of these to do, and that's 35 seconds of hanging. Not actually that much, so I need to give it 35 seconds of effort,
I love that, man. I really love the emphasis on intention there. And I was speaking with an athlete not too long ago who brought up something similar. It might have been Adam Andra. But there's a huge difference to just saying, oh, I'm going to go do my hangs, or I'm going to focus on really pressing my fingers into this thing. I'm going to give it my all. I'm going to focus 100% of my intention on this 7 seconds, as you said. Yeah, I mean, God, that's such important, I think, advice and just a differentiator when it comes to how we do our training. And I'm curious, just before we get back.
I do.
Oh, go ahead.
No, sorry, yeah, but I do think that's actually, it's really hard to do continuously, like on a continuous basis. I definitely don't do it either. Like, I would love to give 110% on every single hang that I do, because I think the gains would be astronomical, but it's so hard to actually do it. But even if you just like try and think about it and focus on it a little bit more when you are training, then I think that's good. That's good intention.
And how do you do that? Are you, when you're getting into a big session like this, where you're going to do some hangboarding, and it sounds like you're going to do some hard bouldering, are you listening to tunes? How are you, do you leave your phone behind? Are you with people or not with people? Like what works for you? What's your secret formula to stay focused?
I think when I can really get into that mindset of giving it everything is when I have a goal or project that I'm very motivated for, and it's getting closer to the time. And some things that I will do to get me in that mindset, if you think you're not going to get up the next rep or do the next hang, I'm always like, okay, the next hang, and that means clipping the chains, or that means getting to the top of the project. And so like whenever I'm climbing, I'm always just like, oh, the next move and I've done the project. And then you get the next move, the next move and I've done the project. So yeah, it's always like that. When you're getting to the end of the session and you just want to, it's that little bit of extra percentage on that rep that you think you're going to fall off on. But if you just give it that little bit more, then you can get the next hold and keep going, kind of thing. And I think those little things just make the difference.
Hell yeah. I love that. Yeah, having that goal, having that clear goal is certainly a very good carrot. That's a good strong motivator. Let's talk a little bit more about this day. So you've done your heavy hangs. You've been as focused and as intentional as possible. Now you're going to do some rock climbing?
Yeah, so I've been using the kilter board quite a lot recently, actually, just because we have a few locally and they're on adjustable system. So it's really nice. You can sort of crank it over to 60 or 70, or you can have it back on 40 degrees. So that's quite nice. And I just kind of tilt it over or not tilt it over, depending. So I'll usually start with just like a board session, pretty basic standard board session. And I'll just go for an hour trying as hard as I can, pretty much, on problems that are at my max, potentially not getting up the problems, but trying really hard moves.
Right. And then taking quite a bit of rest between attempts.
Yeah, like the session isn't like massively structured in terms of like, okay, I'm going to tap my 5-minute rest or 3-minute rest. It is more just I go on feeling. But what I do is I just make sure that I time an hour, because I feel like quite often you can get sucked into just trying hard, and before you know it, it's been like an hour and 45, and then you haven't got on to the next bit of the session or whatever. So just keeping it at an hour, and yeah, just trying really focused and hard for that hour.
And then are you, as part of this, we're kind of talking about a general strength and power training block, so maybe there isn't a whole lot of specificity, but when you do have that project or that goal in mind, and you've quite famously used replicas and created or tried to replicate as much as you can about certain projects, how much is your training focused on an objective that's coming up versus just trying to hit certain energy systems?
Yeah, I'll definitely think about or focus it a little bit more towards the project. So if we're quite a few months out from going to a project or a trip, then it won't be as important. I'll think about it a little bit. I'll be like, okay, well, what's the angle of the project? Let's try and have more of the sessions on that kind of angle. What's the hold type? Okay, let's try and have more of the sessions on that hold type. But I'm not like busting out replicas, at that stage. Whereas when you get a bit closer towards the project, then you might start tailoring it a bit more, of like setting problems or moves that are very similar towards the thing, or even setting whole replicas. And especially for crack climbing, then it's really helped in the past to set replicas, because I mean, you can't get that sort of crack climbing fitness by going down to the gym, because gyms just don't have adequate crack climbing at the moment. Yeah.
You're working on it.
We're working on it, yeah.
That is an interesting point to bring up here, because you're the strongest crack climber in the world, and while a lot of that certainly comes naturally, and you've worked on it for many years now, it is a totally different feeling, than climbing on a kilter board, for example. So how much do you need to kind of keep sharp on these various different locks and jams, when you're in this training block, and how much of it just kind of comes back when you just get back out onto the rock?
Yeah, these days, or these last few years, I haven't done a massive amount on crack replica training. The last real decent stint that I did was, I think it was back in 2021, when me and Tom climbed that massive bridge roof crack.
Yeah.
Just because I knew that I needed really good thumb endurance for that, just because it was this like cupped hand and it was the same motion over and over again.
Right.
So that was my last stint of really sort of pure focused replica crack training. But these days, with the cracks that I've done more recently, so last year, I haven't felt like my ability on the cracks and the jamming has been the limiting factor. I felt like actually working in other aspects.
So Stranger Than Fiction comes to mind. That was, one of the hardest crack climbs here in the U.S. and a project that I was out in Moab while Tom was working on that just recently. And you were able to send it, and it looked pretty freaking limit, at least, based on the film. And obviously it's incredibly hard, Mason Irvine. And you famously or conspicuously kept the shoe on, whereas others have gone with one shoe and taped their toes. But in any event, in terms of like the training and the prep for that, you weren't specifically training for that very bouldery kind of crack climb as much as you were just building some general fitness. You felt the limiting factor was more kind of was it on a fitness side or an overall kind of body strength side, more so than the jams itself?
Yeah, within that year, I did a lot more of what you would just class as normal climbing training. And I think that really positively impacted my crack climbing. But that only positively impacted the crack climbing because I'd done so much crack climbing in the past. So I feel like that fitness and being familiar with the jams and jamming fitness it's all kind of there, and before going on that trip, I didn't actually really do that much. I don't think I did any like crack climbing training as such. It was all just normal climbing training. Yeah, and it worked. So,
well,
but yeah, I feel like it only worked because I guess that was my weakness at the time. Having that strength and power in normal climbing, and my technique in cracks and my strength and endurance in cracks. It's just kind of, it's underlying anyway. It's kind of always there. So,
yeah, the lower hanging fruit was some of this other training that you were doing, which we may get into as we continue through a bit of your plan here. So you've done your hour of hard bouldering after doing your hangboarding. Now, is there more to this day, or are you spent?
Yeah. So one thing I have started doing, which I've never really done in the past, is footless bouldering, and I'm terrible at like campusing, footless bouldering. Like I say, I'm an endurance monkey, so like this stuff is tough for me. But I have it on the plan, and also I've seen obviously all these comp wads are doing it, and they're all absolute beasts, aren't they? So there must be something in with it. But oh man, it was so funny. The first session that I ever did on this campus bouldering, I just couldn't get up anything. I was just absolutely terrible. Yeah, it was so disgraceful. Yeah, but over how long have I been doing it now? Probably 3 months or something, 2 or 3 months. Yeah, I've definitely seen an improvement, and it's funny because it's just not something I've ever done in the past. I've done campus boarding a bit in the past, but actual campus bouldering, I've never really done it. So you're finding
set problems at the gym or climbs like on a kilter board and essentially doing the route, but just you're just bare feet. You're not engaging your feet whatsoever. You're just campusing up a set route.
Yep, just feet off. So yeah, either on a board or, like you say, problems, just normal problems are on the board. Yeah.
And so what this is working is, I guess, some strength and power. So it's basically like you're locking off everything, or you're trying to swing dynamically from one hold to the next, kind of comp kid style.
Yeah, I guess it's both. So it depends on the problem. Sometimes, I mean, I look terrible compared to these comp climbers doing it. So, but I guess there's two ways of moving. You can either use that sort of strength and power to kind of lock and pull between the holds, or you can use that swinging dynamic movement. And I'm still learning these things, and how to move in that way. It's not really in my movement repertoire, all that kind of stuff.
Is it simultaneously working both then? Because obviously you're building strength and power if you're not engaging your lower body whatsoever. So it's all a full upper body exercise and maybe a little bit of core as you're trying to swing. But then are you also trying to write some scripts in the way that your muscle memory works, so that when you do engage feet on a route, you climb it more dynamically or with more kind of momentum? Is that a benefit of this as well, or is it purely like a strength and power building exercise?
For me, it's purely a strength and power building exercise at the moment. But because I've only been doing it for a few months, and within those few months, I haven't been massively climbing outside, I've kind of just been in this training block. I haven't really seen whether that has translated over to the climbing as much. I guess we'll find out, in the spring.
Yeah. It's interesting. I'll check in with you on that. I'd like to hear that, because I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but your style doesn't seem to me to be like particularly dynamic. You're very thoughtful with your technique, with the way you use your feet and heel hooks and twists, and tend to climb things very controlled. And so this kind of exercise where you're essentially just trying to explode from one hold to the next seems quite anti-style.
It's very anti-style for me. Yeah, for sure. I think I'm in that trad climbers movement mindset just from quite a young age. So that's how I've grown up, and I think that's how I generally move on rock. And also, through just like adventure climbing and climbing on loose rock, you end up with this different climbing style, which isn't just yarding and pulling and swinging and being dynamic. So I've kind of gone down one path, but to help you improve, you always need to like work on these weaknesses, don't you? So,
well, I actually got a handful of questions about this sort of trad climber's mindset versus sport climber's mindset versus like a boulderer mindset. We'll get to that a little bit further down in the mindset chapter here, but I'm curious what else you have on this plan. That's maybe
so if I was feeling good, then I would probably do like the endurance session afterwards. So that would either be 8 reps usually I've been doing 8 reps of like 2.5 minutes on with 2 minutes off.
On what?
On a circuit, or generally like a circuit or a route that takes about that length.
Okay.
Usually you should be feeling like 60 to 70% out of 100 pumped. Okay. That's what I usually get to.
Not like a wicked deep pump. You're not falling off of this thing after 2.5 minutes.
No, you're not meant to be, but I tend to end up getting to that stage because I love it.
Right.
So, we should, I mean, in my plan, it's kind of like to 60, 70%.
Okay.
Yeah. But sometimes I get carried away. So.
Yeah, and that's a big day. So in that you would close out the day with that. That would be your one session of that for the week, essentially.
But if I was still feeling all right after that, then I would do like a small amount of weights.
Okay.
Yeah.
What are you focusing on for your weights?
In the recent years, I've been focusing a lot on shoulders, actually, which again is something that I haven't done loads of in my younger years. So I felt like actually shoulder strength and stability and strength in different motions and working on that has actually been really, really good for me. One, in terms of just the shoulder strength, but also 2, in terms of just shoulder niggles and tweaks and injuries. And I feel like if I stop doing the shoulder exercises, then I can often, like, my shoulders feel like, whoa, just kind of feel like a bit painful and creaky. Whereas as soon as I start again, I'm just like, oh yeah, and then they start to feel really good.
What are your go-to? Hit me with a couple. I think I need to work some more shoulder exercises into my routine here. What are you liking?
All the kind of basic ones. So I do the ones lying on your back and then lifting the dumbbell up in front of you. So like this.
From like over your head on the ground to like...
From behind your head to in front of your head above you. And then doing the just normal shoulder press. So from the shoulder up and press. Mm-hmm. And then the front, I don't know what these are called, but like the front raise. So where you're keeping your arm straight and you're raising the dumbbell up in front of you this way.
Right. And you have it kind of straight down at your sides and you're just like putting it straight up in front of you.
Exactly. Straight up in front and then over the head and then lower back down slowly.
Okay. And
then in the past, but not as recent, then I've done exactly the same as that and side ones as well. So side raises.
Okay. Yeah.
And all these ones in
dumbbells though. Yeah.
All pretty basic stuff, yeah. But yeah, that would be like a big day for me of training. Yeah, for sure.
That's you just described my week. And
yeah, I wouldn't like for sure. I would no way do that every day. But that would be like a decent day, you know.
And then do you try to bang that out in a session, or are you doing like a split day kind of morning, evening, you know, when you're structuring these bigger days?
Generally just try and do it all at the gym in one day, but it would usually be quite a long day or, a full afternoon into early evening or something, whatever it might be. Yeah.
Well, this brings up kind of my last question here in this chapter, which is around rest and how you program or kind of treat rest and recovery during a week of training hard, like you're talking about.
Ooh, resting.
You don't rest. This is such a
no. I definitely rest.
Like you're searching the back catalog of your mind for what even resting means.
No, I know. I definitely rest. Yeah, I'm not training all the time. I think if it's a big week of training, then there usually isn't enough time to have a rest day to fit everything in. And usually, I feel like if you like that day that I just explained, if you did that and then you did that twice in a row, then you'd kind of just be pretty broken.
Totally.
And also, if you do that, you wouldn't get like amazing training effects because you just feel broken and then the next session just gets worse. So in a big training week, then I might generally try and do just like a little bit and not necessarily have that much of rest days, but you're just doing like a little bit every day.
Right.
I mean, I definitely will put like a rest day in there or whatever. And then in the slightly...
Like load weeks as well, you know, are you doing like a couple hard weeks and then taking a bit of a break or a deload?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, so usually like if you go in like a 4-week cycle, then the first week would generally be a little bit easier. So you might have 1 or 2 rest days, and then second week might have a rest day, third week might have a rest day, and then the 4th week, then I would try and have like more rest days than climbing days on the deload week, really, because I feel like when you get to that deload week, I mean, I always feel pretty broken. Like I'm like, oh, thank goodness. Like I always feel like at the end of week 3, then the training gains it's like dropping off. Your sessions are like the quality of the sessions are dropping off, I always find, and you're like, that just was a nightmare. You know, you're just hitting that, you're just going on the dip, and then you have that deload week and you're like, I can rest up and then come back into it again.
Last question on kind of this area, and we'll probably dip back into this as we get into some other chapters as well, but do you program for yourself just like fun days, fun climbing days, or, you know, like is it you're in a training block? Is everything very regimented and focused, or are there just like mess around days? I just want to go and maybe not climb the hardest I've ever climbed, but just like screw around with some friends.
I think that comes down to how you're feeling, how tired you are, and also the motivation as well. So, I mean, definitely I will have days like that, but I'll generally just put those in when you're feeling a bit worse, or you're feeling a bit weaker, or you feel like you need a bit more of a rest.
Okay.
Because I feel like when you're actually feeling good and on it, then those are the days you want to capitalize on. and really kind of
Cool.
punch into. Yeah.
Do you pick up, this comes to mind because yesterday I did a board session, and I've got like a list of kind of long-standing projects, on the board that I'll just dip into every once in a while. And if I'm feeling really good, like I'll go and like, give one a rip. And sometimes if not, I'll just kind of work on some that are a little bit lower down the list. Do you have your kilter board problem list? Do you have long-standing projects? Do you try to tackle your training in a way that as if you're projecting something that means a lot to you outdoors?
Not particularly, actually, no. I mean, I do tick off things on the kilter board now, but I've only started doing that recently because I've just forgotten what I'd actually done. But right. I don't particularly have like that project on the kilter board and stuff. I actually just generally think about it in a training sense in a way. I don't particularly get hung up on, I'd love to try that problem again, which I didn't quite manage last session, especially not on a board, I don't think. Maybe I could get that a little bit more on like the general problems around the gym. Then I feel like I could get that. But in terms of boards and training and kilter board, moon board, all that kind of stuff, I don't particularly go back to the same problems. I generally actually just find different things all the time on it. Yeah. And don't get too hung up.
Yeah, for you, it's more a means to an end, to other objectives that are outdoors rather than like the challenge itself is the board. We're not going to be seeing a Pete Whittaker board account anytime soon.
No, I mean, you might be able to follow me on the kilter board, I don't know, but we're not going to have like a board account dedicated to it. No, definitely not.
Get it to your big sense.
I don't think it would be very exciting, It's me punting around on stuff.
I'd watch some footless campusing of some hard kilter board problems. They get easier the steeper it gets.
They're not hard though. That's the thing.
Well, it's all relative. They're hard for me. They're just not maybe hard for Magnus or somebody like that.
Yeah, exactly.
This episode is supported by Rab Clothing and Gear. I think you all know Rab. They've been supporting climbers and adventurers for more than 40 years now, and I had an opportunity to put their stuff really to the test not too long ago as I spent a day out in Moab with Tom Randall and then another time out in Vegas with Anna Hazelnut. And oh man, the Rab gear held up great. I was throwing myself into some cracks, both inverted and normal way up. What would that be considered? Inverted? Not verted? Verted, I guess. And the Rab gear not only provided some friction that I needed so that I didn't fall on my face, but it also kept me warm when it was very cold. It was like 16 degrees out when we started our day in Moab. I also had a great conversation with Tom Randall, who's been with Rab for more than 10 years. He knew Rab, the founder, personally, and this is a company that was started in Sheffield and has just been all about providing fantastic gear. It's gear that you would rather repair than replace. And their repairs are awesome. That time that I spent with Anna Hazelnut out in the desert, she had this coat that had been really torn up. It was a puffy that had been torn up through all sorts of adventures, and Rab put some really cool patches on it in that classic Anna Hazelnut teal. And if you've got a piece of Rab gear, they're going to be able to repair that for you in whatever color you want as well. It's really cool stuff. I love that it's not the same thing that everybody else is wearing out there. You can learn more over at rab.equipment or just hit that link right there in your show notes. This episode's brought to you by the Force Board. Are you into training your fingers? Dumb question. You're a climber. You're obviously obsessed with your finger strength. You're probably looking at your fingers right now as I'm saying this. And let me tell you, the Force Board is a huge step up from hangboarding. If you're not familiar with what a force gauge is, it's this little digital device that connects to your phone, and as you pull on a block or a portable hangboard, it tells you exactly the force that you are using so that you don't need to mount a hangboard, you don't need weights or pulleys to get the desired training stimulus, and you can track all of your data seamlessly and program your workouts right there in the app. And training your fingers this way, let me tell you, instead of doing weighted hangs, reduces injury risk and is just a heck of a lot faster, easier, and more consistent. I've been using one for months now. It is super portable, so I can easily bring it with me to the crag or to the gym for warm-ups. And then I'm also using it to train up my endurance right now, doing some 7-3 repeaters at 60% of my max, which is super easy to program because the app gives me that target line to hit on each and every pull. And as soon as I can't hit that target, I know my session's done. Boom. That's it. I don't get injured. I don't get overly fatigued. Hit that link in your show notes or swing on over to thestruggleclimbingshow.com/forceboard to learn more about it and score yourself 10% off your purchase by using code STRUGGLE at checkout.
Well, let's shift here and talk about nutrition, because we were talking a little bit about recovery, and I'm curious when it comes to nutrition here, if there's an area of struggle for you.
Yeah, nutrition is an interesting one. I feel like there's lots of different sort of thoughts, struggles, opinions with nutrition. I would say food and nutrition is definitely not something I've particularly struggled with. I would say, like, one particular thing that comes to mind where we could say that it was a struggle was when I was training for Recovery Drink, so which is HC plus crack tradline in Norway, and it's pretty tricky. And me and Tom I think we'd spent one season on it, and we hadn't managed to do it. And I thought, okay, I'm going to come back next season, and I'm going to come back sort of like lighter, and hopefully I'll be stronger and lighter. And being me and how I do things, I was like, well, I'm going to go on this diet. And I went all in on this diet, just like full in, just really, really diet heavy,
Right.
No, not heavy, not getting heavy, getting light, but
it sounds like you committed to the idea of losing weight.
I committed to the idea. Exactly, yeah.
God, what was the goal, and what did you end up doing?
Well, I had a goal of like, it would be great to be this way. I'll feel so light, and also it's not something I'd ever done before. And food and nutrition is not something that I'm particularly knowledgeable on or know that much about. And like I say, never really done it before. And I just basically did like a terrible job of it all. And I basically just didn't, I just didn't eat properly. I got pretty grumpy. I got grumpy with Mari, and yeah, things just didn't go well. And I went out and I didn't actually manage to do the climb. And the really interesting thing was that I had got much lighter. I don't know how much weight I'd lost, but I definitely got lighter, and I felt very, very strong and very, very light. But what I had been doing was I'd been losing weight, and then as I was losing weight, I was then adding that weight into a weight vest, and I was always training in a weight vest. So as I lost the weight, I was still training at my normal weight, if that makes sense.
Yeah, interesting.
So, and then what happened was, this is the funny thing. So I did that, and I never actually trained at my new weight, the weight that I'd lost. So then I went out to Norway, and I got on the route, and suddenly I didn't have the weight vest on anymore, and I was a number of kilos lighter, and I was like, holy smokes, like I'm so strong. It was outrageous.
Totally.
But the funny thing was, I couldn't climb properly because I hadn't adapted my body to that weight, and I was like, I couldn't stand on my feet properly or anything.
Interesting.
And I couldn't. It was a total shambles. And then so I was grumpy, I was light, I couldn't stand on my feet properly, and I didn't manage to do the route. And then I really learned, like, oh yeah, I did that very, very wrong, and I did that very, very badly.
Yeah, what an interesting experiment, though. I mean, this is not, for those who are listening, this is not a how-to segment here.
It's not a how-to at all. I just want to reiterate that I didn't send the project. I felt absolutely terrible, and I've never, ever done it again since. So that's just to reiterate, I made a lot of mistakes there, but learned a lot.
But yeah, you learned a lot. I mean, you learned a lot about your body and what you responded to and didn't. And grumpiness is a factor. And, how you feel, of course, is a factor. But also how interesting that anybody could just put on a weight vest and train for a while and take it off and it would feel good. But you kind of went to the extreme, which is like you were zeroing out your weight loss by adding the weight back. So you never experienced your body at that new weight. Yeah, how fascinating, dude. And yeah, it didn't work, but like a lot of our experiments that we run on ourselves didn't work. It sounds like you have a healthy relationship with food, and this didn't create, any sort of like negative association with you and diet and body image, which are all the, very common or all too common, if you will, pitfalls for people who are in strength to weight ratio sports. But for you to just kind of run this like N=1 experiment and see what you responded to, and in this case, of course, it didn't pan out the way that you had hoped, but you learned a lot, and I'm sure you took those learnings into how you train for your next thing.
Yeah, I did, and I came back another time to Recovery Drink, and basically just did everything differently and ate normally, had the normal balanced diet that I did, trained hard and I managed the route.
Yes, sent the route and then moved over next door and sent something even harder. So yeah, dude, good on you. Well, what does that kind of normal diet look like? Like how do you feel yourself during training? And then I'm also curious in juxtaposing that with like a big expedition, like this thing in Greenland on Mirrorwall where you were out there for 40 some days, and I'm sure just burning like 10 trillion calories a day with all the rucking and hiking and planning and hauling and all of that. So yeah, what is like kind of a normal week like right now, a gym week look like for you? Just, we don't have to get too detailed, but just like, what do you like? What's important to you when you're fueling? And then, yeah, how does it look like when you're out on one of these like really grueling objectives?
So in a normal week, I would say that it's pretty balanced. Nothing out there. Not like a Will Bosey oatcakes and parmesan sort of thing.
Works for him, but also like gas station.
It works for him, yeah.
Yeah, totally.
Love it. But no, I mean, for breakfast, sort of like yogurt and cereal. I generally have like 3 eggs now as well.
So like
for
big
lunch
in the morning.
Yeah, I've kind of got into the eggs recently. But it goes through phases, in the past I've been into like porridges and with fruits and nuts and that kind of stuff. And then for lunch tends to be, I would say, a bit lighter in a way. It could just be nuts, it could be crackers and cheese, it could be like a bit of a sandwich or bread or, whatever, something pretty simple. And then for dinner, then we'll tend to actually like cook something, and that could be, some meat with potatoes and veg, or fish with potatoes and veg. Or we generally try and have like, I say we, this me and Mari, like try and have fish a couple of times a week, some meat a couple of times a week, and then maybe some sort of like chili or curry or something like that. And then on a Friday, we always have Taco Fridays. So that's the highlight of the food week.
Hell yeah. Yeah. Taco Tuesdays over here for me, just because we're fans of alliteration, but the tacos just have to be a day. That's the rule.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, cool. So very normal. I mean, that's just like a normal person diet, basically. And it sounds like you're focused a bit on protein with like eggs and yogurt and this kind of thing. But are you doing shakes or any sort of big supplementation or anything along the way as well?
Not at the moment, no. I have dabbled in a few things here and there in the past and just see if and how it's had an effect. And I feel like some things have maybe had like a marginal effect, but yeah, I haven't dived into any of that recently.
Well, then let's contrast that then with like a big expedition, a big trip where you're out and you're working hard. Again, Greenland comes to mind. If you want to talk maybe specifically through kind of what that looked like in terms of how you guys were eating out there and staying energized for those big objectives.
Yeah, on something like the expedition to Greenland, then the food, obviously you have to take your food for, I think it was 40 days? Yeah, maybe 40 days. And I guess you have different things. So you sort of have like the base camp food, and that's a bit more meal based. You can actually cook properly, I mean, it's still all kind of rice and lentils, chickpeas, dried vegetables and things like this, which you can kind of mix all together with some herbs and spices. But then when you're actually kind of out and you're away from base camp and you're on the wall or you're hiking in or whatever, then because you have to carry everything, then you really have to be pretty precise with the food that you're taking, because you want just enough to keep you fueled, but not too much so you're not carrying anything extra. So we took a lot of those freeze-dried meals because obviously there's a lot of water around, so we could just add water and have the freeze-dried meals. Freeze-dried meals are pretty light, so good for carrying. But on that trip, it was, yeah, I would say we were comfortable, but it was like on the edge of, you didn't really want any less for being able to perform, I would say. So in the morning, we had one sort of freeze-dried meal for breakfast. Sometimes it was like an actual breakfast one, so it would be porridge, but then by the end we ran out of those, so we were eating like curry in the morning and stuff.
Right.
And then for lunch, because we were kind of going all day, especially on the hiking, and if you were the climber for the day on the wall, then you're going at it all day. We just had, nuts, dried fruit, and then 2 bars. So it was I can't remember the weight of nuts that everybody had per day, but it was nuts, dried fruit. Oh yeah, cheese, Parmesan cheese. Yeah, Parmesan cheese.
There's Will Bosey's Parmesan.
Yeah. And then the bars. And then for the evening meal, then it was another freeze-dried meal again. Yeah, and I would always try and save like a little bit of stuff from lunch for a little bit of after evening meal, just to, sweeten get a bit of goodness.
Yeah, exactly. A little extra treat there. And speaking of treats, do you have what's the guilty pleasure, or what's the go-to treat for you?
I mean, I love treats and cakes. I mean, if there's one thing that's like I don't drink coffee. I don't drink that much. I don't smoke. I don't do any of that stuff. But like treats and like I like a good treat. Like a good cake. It's good. It's good stuff.
Hell yeah.
Yeah.
Power. So, donuts for power. Strudels for power. I'm big on I'm very much big on pastries over here myself as well.
In general, I don't think too much about that stuff, and I have a pretty balanced and healthy diet. I would say if I was going for something like at my limit or a little bit harder, then I may sort of like cut out those treats and all that kind of stuff a little bit, just to. I do think it, like eating lots of sugar, it does takes the edge off a little bit, and you do feel a little bit more sluggish and that kind of stuff. So if you're churning loads of that stuff down, then it's probably not good for the project season.
No doubt. I mean, it's it's like all the refined sugars are, it's pretty bad for you, but so good. And in the training block, it's not bad. I feel like it gives you a little extra energy, a little extra carbs, but yeah, I hear you. I try to at least cut way back on that stuff when I'm trying to get into battle mode. If nothing else, I feel like it's kind of a mental switch that flips, where I'm like, no, okay, I'm focused. Like I've got an objective here. I'm getting serious about it. So I'm going to cut some cookies out. I don't know if it makes that much of a big difference. I'm not a high performing athlete like you are, but I think like it just kind of puts me in a mind state of like getting ready to really perform.
Yeah, I think it is that as well, isn't it? Just like that mindset and getting ready, and you've made that little change, and now you're preparing, and now you're good to go. Just getting into that mindset, isn't it?
And then of course after the send, then you gotta go ham back on the sweets again. You gotta celebrate, You've earned it. It's just
exactly.
For me, climbing is all about these seasons between when I can eat a lot of pastries.
Yeah. Yeah. The climbing is the training for the pastry season. Yeah.
Totally. Pastry season is my favorite season.
Yeah, that's the best season. The quality season.
Well, let's move on here. We're going to talk about tactics and technique. We talked a little bit about the Greenland trip, but I want to dive in and explore more of that in this here. Actually, I want to just. You had a post a little while ago, just while it's top of mind here. I'm going to take a little left turn here, but it's my show, so I'm allowed to. And it was like this crazy post about the approach to mirror wall, or just where kind of the climbing area. I think you're like going through a fjord, and basically like it was a post about like this catastrophic flood that happened like not too long after you all were there. Can you explain it to me? I wasn't quite understanding the science. You put some really good geeky science in there, and it kind of went over my head. But essentially, it seemed like you guys were at, maybe unbeknownst to you, a very high risk of getting wiped out in like an insane flood.
Yeah, it was really interesting actually, because I hadn't heard about any of this flooding before going, and I don't know any climbers that had done. But when I heard about this flood that had happened in the valley after, I think it was 3 weeks after we left, I started looking into it a little bit more, and I found some research papers on that actually this was natural phenomenon that happened in a cycle every either like 10 to 15 years or so.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah,
Where like enough water builds up in some area and then gets released?
Exactly, yeah. So it was meltwater from glaciers on the plateau, I guess, coming down, filling up in this lake, and then reaching a threshold, and then essentially like it was really weird. It was like going under the glacier that we walked on, and then coming out the bottom of it. But I read some articles about the flood that just happened, and they'd measured that it was, in its peak flow, it was twice the sort of flow or velocity of Niagara Falls.
Whoa.
So it was like pretty, I mean, it would have built up to that, because I think they said it happened, the flood was over 20 days. So I think there just would have been a very, very quick rise in, you know, river level, and maybe that whole plateau that we've been walking on would have been flooded.
Oh my gosh.
So if we'd been on that plateau in that time, or down in the rivers and stuff, then it probably could have been pretty dangerous. But if we'd been coming from Mirror Wall and then come to the end of the glacier and then seen the flood, then I think we could have walked around on the hillsides and stuff.
Right.
But it's hard to understand the magnitude of something like that when you're not actually there, and how it can affect it and that kind of stuff. Because it was a huge amount of water. I can't remember what they said. Was it 3 trillion cubic liters or something of water that was released in 20 days?
Yeah, it was like an unfathomable, just like the map that showed kind of like the volume of water and where it went, and the level of it was wild. So yeah, I'm really interested. Like this is again, it's a little bit of a diversion here, but let's just stay on it for a second because we're talking about it. Like when you plan a trip like that, it sounded like you all weren't aware of that. I mean, you were probably mostly focused on the climbing objective and talking to the guys who had been out there the prior season and trying to plan out how you were going to tackle the pitches and all the logistics that go into like a very remote bit wall climbing objective. But then there's all this other stuff, you know, that often doesn't get a whole lot of coverage. And I'm like really interested in going out and climbing in some of these remote and really exciting areas. But you're saying this was like a 40+ day trip. And, you know, how much of that was climbing and how much of that was actually like going in and hauling stuff in and setting up base camp and just all the logistics that go into being able to climb in these incredible areas?
It's a lot of work before you go on the trip, just organizing and planning and all that kind of stuff. And then when you're actually on the trip, well, we sailed from Iceland initially, so that's right, 4 or 5 days of sailing, and then you have to get everything off the boat, set up the base camp, and then we had about a week, I think it was a week of walking in. So you can actually do the walk to Mirror Wall in 1 day, and I think it's 28 kilometers. So from base camp to Mirror Wall, 28 kilometers. It's over a number of different terrains, so like moraine, desert, and glacier, and then it's a bit more tricky glacier right before the wall. But because we had all the gear, then we had to walk it 5 times, I think.
Oh, wow.
So sort of like there, back, there. And that took 7 days overall to do all that. And I guess we're walking, it's like with 30 kilo haul bags or bags on every time you're walking. So it's kind of like they're full days of hiking. Sure. And then on the wall, I think we spent 18 days. So I think it actually took us 11 days to climb the route. And then we spent another week actually just trying to free as many pitches as we could. So initially when we climbed it, we were doing a mixture of free climbing and aid climbing and just trying to get up the wall, because just getting up there was pretty tricky with the line that we were on. And then after that we came back down and tried to free as much as possible. And then you still have the walk out, but you don't have as much gear, you have the same amount of gear, but you have less food. So stuff's a lot lighter. So we only had to do the journey 3 times on the way out. So it was back down to base camp, back up, back down to base camp. Yeah. And then sailed back. Significantly
more haggard at the end of the trip, I'm sure, than the beginning of the trip. So those 3 trips, I'm sure, felt like the 5 trips at the beginning. Well, I want to, we'll put a little pin in this because I'm going to loop back to the climbing, the actual climbing of this route, which I want to say, was it like 8B rated R? Is that what it ended up going? I mean, just
Yeah, on some of the hard stuff, yeah.
yeah, really, really hard, crazy looking climbing. So I'm excited to talk with you about some of this in a minute. But let's get specific here, and I'll do my job. I'll stick to my job here. We can talk about tactics and technique. And when you think about technique in climbing, and crack climbing has a lot of technique, at least to me, like a lot of very foreign technique as well. More so than just face climbing. There's plenty of technique in face climbing as well, but crack is kind of its own special thing. I want to talk a little bit about that, and I got some questions on it. But first, let me ask you about struggle through the lens of struggle. And when you think about technique or tactics, when it comes to maybe tackling a project, has anything been, or do you tend to struggle with anything in the tactics and technique area?
In terms of technique, I feel like I was saying before, I'm not the strongest climber ever. So I feel like I've used my technique to my advantage to overcome that struggle. So I've done that a lot in the past, and I feel like I'm a reasonably good technical climber, I would say, and I tend to find ways of techniquing my way around things rather than strengthening my way around things. But one thing that I have noticed in the last few years is the difference between technique of climbing steep things, so maybe like steep boulders, steep boards, and technique of climbing, more vertical or slabby or these kind of things. Because I often find we can say the technical climbers are these climbers that stand on their feet or have amazing footwork and standing balancing up slabs and stuff, and that's because it's kind of easy to see that, and it's easy to distinguish it because they obviously are standing on their feet. But sometimes I feel like we can forget that these really high level climbers or these really high level boulderers who may have a lot of strength and power and that stuff as well are actually also really, really technical climbers on their feet, but in these steep things, but in a different way. And I feel like I'm a good technical climber on vertical and slab and using my heels and things like this. But in terms of my technical ability in a steep terrain, because I've done less of it, I would say my technique, my foot technique in those terrains is actually less. But I think people don't tend to realize that there is so much technique in using your feet well on a board, or that it's, they might see somebody really strong on a board, like Will Bosey, and he's just an absolute beast, but probably the way he is actually using his feet is very, very technical, but you just can't quite understand it because it looks so much in the arms. And that's something that I've been trying to learn, because again, it's just not something that I've done loads of in the past, I guess. So
I struggle there myself as well. I mean, I climb a lot of steep stuff out here at the Red River Gorge, but there's a lot of feet and there's usually big buckets, and I can heel hook or toe into certain things and, get heel toe cams and all sorts of kind of, things that you get to enjoy when the holds are big. But on a steep board, like if I'm on a moon board, I definitely struggle with that. I'm cutting feet all the time when I shouldn't be, when I watch people who are better technical board climbers than me, where they're able to keep feet on or use feet in ways that I'm not able to. And so I'm just curious for you personally, like what are you working on? What skills on steep climbing are you working on, and what has been paying off?
I think for me, it's actually like really focusing and remember how to pull with the feet, because on vert and slab, we're pushing with the feet, and it's very different to what you do on a board. On a board, you're pulling with the feet. And obviously I'm thinking a lot on a board of like, hold on as much as possible. But actually, when you're climbing, if you consciously think about your feet and consciously think, I'm going to, try and keep my foot on it, or I'm going to actually try and pull with my toes inside the climbing shoe as I'm stepping on the hold, or I'm going to, pull back with the toes. And so I'm sort of engaging the calf muscle, and you try and keep the foot on the hold. It's surprising what you can, when you actively think about it, like, oh yeah, my foot is staying on there. That's what I should be doing all the time. But because I don't have that ingrained in me. I know I'm not doing that all the time. So I know I'm like losing a percent there, and I'm putting that percent on my arms when really I should just be doing that naturally, and I should be pulling with my toes and pulling my toes inside my climbing shoe and, you know, really digging in without, you know, it should be second nature. And I think that's what these really strong board climbers are actually doing, like that's second nature to them. Whereas for me, second nature is actually how to push on the feet, you know, standing on slabs, standing on smears, you know, face like that. I'm really good at that, and that's what I've done a lot of. So that feels normal to me, and that feels like my technical climbing. But on steep terrain, there's definitely, you know, things that could be more ingrained into my climbing. I don't know if that actually makes sense, but
yeah, it really does. I'm
Yeah.
glad that you specifically highlighted that, because I think it's very much a mental shift or a mental focus to take. For me, you know, like I have a hard time just with where I'm at in my strength or lack thereof, just doing kind of some of the easiest problems on a moon board, for example. But when I am doing those, like the ones that I would consider to be like the more entry level ones, they do have like bigger feet and bigger holds. And it's just like almost as part of the last part of my warm up, thinking about like, oh, let me just like pull with my feet. Let me engage my hamstrings and my calf muscles and feel what that feels like. When you see somebody like Aiden or Will climbing on a board and they're very close to the board, I'm always sagging off of the board, you know, I'm like, my butt's sagging off and I got long straight arms. I'm always trying to relax on these holds. And like, you know, that's not really what they're designed for. They're designed for like more kind of fully engaged, powerful climbing. And so really engaging the toes and kind of that goes through the whole chain, like all the way through up to the fingers, is a great thing to keep in mind. I appreciate that tip. I like it. Do you throw heel hooks on the board as well?
do I like heel hooks on the board?
Yeah. Do you throw those? Because, you know, some people, there's like two schools here. There's like heel hooks and no heel hooks on the board.
Yeah, for sure. I'll use some heel hooks on the board sometimes. If there's kind of like a problem I'm trying to do, like, like there's definitely a heel hook there, and, you know, I've been working on it just to get the tick, you know, then I'll use a heel. But in general, I would try to stay away a little bit, just because I know that's what I'm good at already and I need to work on other things. There was a time period where I was only wearing like slipper climbing shoes to prevent me from heel hooking. So basically every time I heel hooked, the heel of the slipper, the shoe would just come off.
Come on. That's great.
Yeah.
Force yourself to toe into these holds. Well, let me ask you about heel hooking for a second here, because it is a skill that I don't do very well, and I think you're incredibly skilled at heel hooks. And for those who are listening who want to improve their heel hooking, do you have any thoughts or tips or ways to think about or train that skill?
I think there's different types of heel hooks, and probably just understanding the different ways and positions that you can put your heels on the hold and how they work is a good starting point. Because obviously you can have a heel hook where you're just hooking with the back of the heel and you're pulling more with the hamstring, or you can have the more of the side of the heel, which you might use for more of a rock over type of move, and you're then rolling up onto the ball of the foot to do a move.
Having the heel more kind of, if you're talking about like a boulder problem or something like that, flat against the wall where you're kind of rocking over the side of the heel, or kind of engaging like the heel to the ankle area, that seems more solid to me than if I was to like throw my foot on a hold where my inner ankle was like touching the wall, and, you know, kind of where the foot is like turned out. But maybe there's a time and place for both. I don't know. Is there, you know, like, I guess you tell me, like, in a more general sense for us beginner heel hookers, you know, what's the best heel to engage, do you feel?
I guess it depends on the type of hold that you're heel hooking initially. But if you're looking to, this is very, very general, but if you're looking to pull with the heel, so pull across the wall or pull into somewhere and the heel is slightly out to the side, then you might consider using the back of your heel, like where the Achilles is. Whereas if you're trying to rock up and over onto the heel and get weight onto it, then I would use the side of the heel. But that's so very generic.
No, but that makes sense. I mean, I recall you did that a video where you were on that V17 that Barefoot Charles did, and like part of the exiting moves as you're like coming around the lip onto the more vertical, you like threw a left heel like straight up high over your head, and you were trying to kind of like essentially like pull yourself up into that, and that was like a straight down heel. I mean, that was like you kind of slotted it like essentially where the Achilles is, whereas if you're trying to rock over onto a heel, it does make sense where it's kind of more the side of the heel. I mean, it's certainly a more of a visual thing. The podcast isn't the best medium, I guess, to be talking about the nuance of heel hooking, but you implement them so well. It's a good thing for me to try to understand, because I do think that I have a tendency to just put my toes on everything and, you know, kind of try to push. But as you get on steeper climbs, it can make so much more sense to pull in with the heel and try and rock into things with the heel rather than always push away, where then it's putting a lot more on the fingers, I feel like.
Yeah, and I think especially with the rocking over onto the heel and using the side of the heel, then coming up onto the ball or the sole of the heel and that motion, then also having flexible hips is very, very useful, because that's the motion that you're trying to do. You're trying to come over and get your hips as close to the wall as possible. So having that ability to be able to frog your hips out and point your knee out to the side and basically just get your groin as close to the wall as possible is really useful.
Yeah, that's great. And I actually had a question about, it kind of falls in line with this, which is Maddie wrote in and said, "Hey, Pete, I'm curious about your favorite techniques to climb, quote unquote, above the grade if you're weak like me." So I guess Maddie's saying that he's weak. He's trying to climb above that. I mean, you can't technically climb above the grade. You're either climbing the grade or not. But I think his point is well made. And you've talked about how you rely on technique to essentially make up for what may be a slight deficiency in strength or power. I'm in that camp as well. So we talked about hips. We talked about heels. Anything else come to mind for Maddie's question there?
For extra tips and just sort of extra techniques.
Yeah, that might help overcome, like if let's say you're weak for the grade for strength, for finger strength or power, like what comes to mind in terms of like a way to kind of technique your way into that grade?
Yes, I mean, those two ones that we've covered are, I would say, really, really important. And if you just asked me that question and I hadn't already answered with those two, then I would have said, because I'm definitely always one for like trying to move my hips into a position to just take the weight off the arms a little bit more. And the same with the heels as well. I feel like heel hooking has been a savior to my climbing in many, many ways. You know, I've got up things that I just wouldn't have been able to get up if I didn't heel hook. Also jamming as well. And I feel like that has saved me quite a lot on, I mean, I know I go after jamming routes, but it saved me a lot on routes which you wouldn't actually expect there to be necessarily jams on, where you can find jams. Maybe not so much on projects, but you know, when you're on-siting and stuff, and just take like Spain, for example, where there's lots of nice sport climbing and it's really fun to on-site stuff. And when you're going for these on-sites on these like 2-3 routes and stuff, quite often you can find jams in between those features where, you know, people haven't jammed before. And it's just like balancing that strain of, you know, you can jam a little bit and then you can use your forearm and use your fingers and get the pump in the forearm and stuff. So yeah, I think jamming has definitely sort of kept me on routes which I would have otherwise fallen off as well.
Here at the Red, where there are, you know, crack climbs and great trad climbing, but for me, like on a overhung sport route, sometimes you'll find like a horizontal kind of ledge that's got like some crack in the back of it that most people are just kind of laying their arm on or just hanging off. But sometimes you can like wiggle in like a little bit of a jam there and just rest on the bones that way. I think that's great. That's a great tip, actually. I like that for just recovering on route.
Yeah, also another thing, because you were just saying resting there as well. Another thing I would say is sort of getting good at resting, or learning how to rest or how to recover. Because, I mean, a rest is restful. So anybody can stay in a rest for the grade. If we're talking about trying to climb above the grade that you're at, the resting point of that route. You should be able to stay there, but actually learning to stay in that rest really well and learning how to do the rest and recover properly, and also knowing that point of when you're recovered enough to then start going, but you don't want to stay there too long, because I feel like sometimes if you rest too long in the rests, then you start to go backwards a little bit. You kind of like get de-warm. So I think just learning how to do the rests on harder routes, I think is really useful.
This episode's brought to you by Rungni. Y'all know Rungni. It's Magnus Mitbo's company. I love every single thing they make. Let me highlight a few of my favorite products right now. First of all, the harness pants. Oh my gosh, you probably heard me talk about these pants like for the past year. They are durable, they are stretchy, they are feather light, and they look fantastic. And now, oh man, I'm really psyched. They just launched a new version of the harness pants. It's like an offshoot. It's the harness utility pants. More pockets, elastic waistband for the perfect fit, and also improved sizing. So whether you're rubbing up against rock or trekking through the forest, these pants are tough, they're durable, and they are built to withstand whatever you throw at them. And I also want to highlight Magdust Super Dry. This is a new chalk that they just came out with. Super dry formula. If you've got sweaty hands, or if you're like me, you're spending a lot of time in the gym right now, this stuff will keep your hands sticky on rock or plastic. I love all of it. And if you use code STRUGGLE or that link in your show notes right there, you can get 15% off store-wide. Let's go. I just want to take a quick second here to talk about how I'm keeping track of all my training and climbing over the course of days, weeks, months, and years. And I'm using an actual physical analog journal, a paper journal that I'm holding in my hands right now, called the 5-Year Training and Performance Journal. I created this. I've been using something like this for the last 9 years, and it's a reflective journal, meaning I put something in for every single day, and at the end of the year, the next year starts back underneath that first one, so that as you go, you are able to see where you were at 1 year prior, 2 years prior, 3 years prior. You can log your goals at the beginning of every month and see what you checked off. And then the big breakthrough for me is that I'm able to reflect back and see what training interventions are actually working, what are worthwhile, and maybe which ones aren't. And I'm also able to see with a ton of gratitude and joy how much progress I've made. And I've never been able to get that from training apps. I like training apps. They help me to do my training, but this reflective journal has totally changed how I'm able to understand my personal training, my performance, and then everything that I do as a climber, like all my notable routes that I've sent, all my thoughts and dreams, they're all in here. And I get to look back and enjoy that day after day and year after year. And now you can too, because I made it and I'm selling it. And for $40, I think that's probably the cheapest thing you could buy that will last you 5 years as a climber. You can learn more over at thestruggleclimbingshow.com/journal.
All right, well, let's shift to my favorite chapter here and where we got a lot of questions as well, and that's the mental game. You're a bold climber, Pete. You've done some crazy stuff, man. And so I'm excited to crack open this noggin of yours and see what makes you tick when it comes to the mental side of climbing. But first, let's enter in where we do, which is through struggle. Do you struggle? Where do you struggle on the mindset side of climbing?
With the mindset side of climbing, is that in sort of with techniques or?
Now, the two, well, I guess I'll bring up the two most common themes that come up here, and that's fear of falling, where we got a lot of questions for you because, again, quite bold with your climbing, so conquering that fear of falling, and oftentimes for professional climbers, fear of failure when it comes to taking on maybe a big objective and feeling that pressure, the pressure to send, do the thing, or to perform in front of a crowd and all of that. But has that all come naturally to you, or has any of that been a struggle?
Yeah, I think that's a good place to start, actually, because fear of falling is always a big one, isn't it? And I always think that people looking from the outside into professional climbers think that they are not scared of falling. And you might look at some of the climbing that I've done, and I've been soloing on blooming big walls and half dome and like stuff in Norway, and you're like, well, you can't be scared of falling ever. But it's like, if you haven't done it for a while, then you get scared of falling. Like I feel like it's a natural thing, like if I haven't been sport climbing for a long time and then I suddenly get really high above the bolt, you kind of look down and you go like, ooh, crikey, I haven't been in this situation for a while. Like it doesn't feel massively familiar, and like it can feel like a little bit scary the first time you go back out sport climbing. But then because you've done it so much, or because I've done it so much in the past, then you remember that it is totally fine, and you can fall off, and you know, all these things come back, and then you can get into that mindset. But yeah, I would say, yeah, climbers do experience fear of falling. Like even at a really high level, if they haven't done that thing for a long time, then you're going to experience it, and I experience it as well. So yeah.
Yeah, and can you share how you manage that when those feelings arise? Whether you're en route or maybe you're tying in or preparing, and you're starting to feel that anxiety or that fear about, hey, this is a rated R or rated X pitch that I'm about to pop onto here. Do you have any tools that you use to help manage those feelings?
Interestingly, I would tend to sometimes actually get less nervous for the more scary things, which
Really?
is kind of maybe counterintuitive to what you might think. But maybe that's just because you're in the appropriate mindset for it, or you've done the appropriate preparation for it. So actually when you step into that arena or into that zone of, okay, I'm getting on this R-rated route, this X-rated route, you've actually already done all the preparation to get there. And when you see myself or other people climbing on these scary routes, it's not just like we've hopped off the couch and then suddenly got on it and can suddenly just manage that fear really well. You know, we've built up to it over a number of years, doing not scary things, moderately scary things, you know, and then scary things. And it's just that gradual build up. And then also leading up to that thing, it's not just like we haven't done it for the previous 4 months. It's like you've built into that, but people often see only the finished product of a film on YouTube of somebody really run out above their gear and looking really calm and controlled and being able to manage it, but they don't see all the other stuff that's come behind it, of actually like, oh, I was feeling pretty scared today on that sport climb, on those bolts and that kind of stuff, and the build up to it. So yeah, I think people can get the wrong interpretation that we're just not ever scared or have some amazing like ability to deal with it in a way.
Can you recall a time where you were like incredibly scared en route?
Yeah, I've got one has come to mind straight away there. It was on a new route with Tom, and we were in Val d'Orco in Italy, and it was on second or third pitch, and I'd quested up this wall. We didn't really know what the grade was, and it was a lot looser than I was expecting, and I ended up getting like pretty run out. I had some decent cams below me, but a lot of the rock that I was on was like blocky and felt like it was gonna fall off, and it was quite steep as well, so you actually had to pull on the hold, so you couldn't just kind of press and push and stand your way around things like you would do on loose rock. And it was the one time on a route where I was like actually close to tears because I was so scared. It was a long time ago now. Must have been about 19 at the time or something. But that one always springs to mind because I was like, it was one time that I can particularly remember like, holy smokes, I am way out of my depth here, and this has just got very serious suddenly. Yeah, and I was just incredibly scared. So yeah, it just ended up being very loose, very run out, and into terrain that hadn't been climbed before. And yeah, it was a mental battle, that's for sure.
That's a recipe for tears for
Yeah.
for sure. Did you say that you free soloed Half Dome?
No, I didn't free solo it, but I've free soloed a lot of pitches on El Cap and Half Dome because I soloed Half Dome and El Cap in a day. But by soloed, just means climbed alone. So
Right.
I free soloed large sections of them and then roped up for some sections. So, but again, it's not like I just jumped straight into that. I'd done a lot of preparation to build myself up to feeling comfortable doing that kind of stuff. But
You had rehearsed those routes a number of times. I'm assuming before jumping in and going for that.
Interestingly, not actually.
Oh no.
So I climbed Half Dome once before with Mari, and then I'd climbed the nose twice before with two different climbing partners. But that's the only times I'd done them, and I'd never soloed them. And actually on Half Dome, I did end up going the wrong way on one bit because I wasn't that familiar with the route, and I had to do this kind of like down climbing and stuff like that. So yeah, but I mean, it all went smoothly, but I wouldn't say like I knew the routes very well. But what I had done prior to that trip was I'd done a lot of preparation of soloing on big cliffs. So in Norway, just getting into that mindset of switching between rope soloing and free soloing and daisy soloing.
Yeah. Those are kind of big mindsets to shift between, and also bold trad climbing where the placements are maybe not the best and they're run out. You almost go into a little bit of a soloing mindset. It would seem like, at least from some of the conversations that I've had with others who have done that. And we had a handful of questions on this topic specifically. I'm going to get to one for you here. This is from a Patreon member, Trevor, who says, I'd love to know how fear fits into Pete's tolerance for discomfort and pushing trad limits. He's one of the most notoriously bold climbers. I think he only placed 10 pieces on his FA of Crown Royale mental. I guess, first of all, is that true? 10 pieces only on Crown Royale?
I don't think so, no. I think that might be wrong.
Okay. That would seem, because that's a long climb. That would seem like not. And then that's one, too, that you kind of did. Isn't it on that one that you like untied at the end and just like fully topped it out?
Yeah, I did. I think that all got a little bit over egged up in the media when that came out, because the top section was really, really easy where I untied. Yeah. It was like really easy. So yeah, I wasn't like blooming still soloing up. Like,
Right.
Really,
But still,
definitely not. I would have taken a longer rope if it was like that.
It was worth the media attention. I feel, if nothing else, it's just pretty badass to kind of finish a route that way. You get the full value of the experience. But to the broader question, just kind of the tolerance for pushing trad limits. And we had another question from a Patreon member, Alexander, who said, I have a much lower trad red point grade than my sport red point grade. What does Pete see as the common hangups for progressing one's trad climbing, and recommendations that he might see for people like me who want to up their trad game? And it sounds like there's kind of a mental side of things, right? Like if we're able to climb something on top rope that we can't climb on lead sport, or we can climb something on lead sport that we can't climb on trad, if it's the same terrain, then it's not the fitness that's keeping us back, right? It's the mental aspect. And either it's confidence in placing gear or ability to place gear, or it's maybe a fear, right? A fear of falling. And so this is just your area. This has been, for whatever reason, you seem drawn to this boulder style of climbing. So what can we mere mortals learn from what you're doing at the highest end that we might be able to apply to just sport climbing or trad climbing at things that are more near our limit?
Yeah, I think for trad climbing, where you can really start to push it is when you have the confidence in your own gear and your own gear placing. And that doesn't necessarily mean that it has to be bomber gear, but it has to be the confidence that you know that this is a 2 out of 10 and you know that this one is an 8 out of 10. Mm-hmm. And you have that ability to be able to look at it every time and go, yes, that's that. And that's a good piece, and that's a bad piece, and that's a mediocre piece or whatever. And I think then when you have that ability to do that, you're able to push yourself at the right time in the right way. Because if you don't have that knowledge, and if you think an 8 out of 10 or something in your gear placement, and then it ends up being a 5 out of 10 or something, and then you end up pushing yourself at the wrong time. So I think it's really important to have that knowledge, basically, so you can give yourself the best chance, and then you know when to push it and when to not push it.
Is the only way effectively to develop that knowledge then to test the pieces, to take falls on them?
I think for me, it built up from a very young age, and it doesn't have to necessarily be actually like testing the pieces, but it's more just building like a really big depth of knowledge. And that could also be actually like taking gear placements out. And you know, one thing about gear placing is it's like with any climbing technique. If you look and you analyze the technique, and if you think about what you're doing and you have a bit more thought and intention, then you'll improve quicker and you'll actually master things quicker. And it's the same with gear as well. If you actually look in the rock and look how it's placed and look how the gear is working and look how your friend has put the gear in, and look how you've put the gear in, you'll actually like, you know, and be intentional about it and what is good about this piece and what is bad about this piece. It's not like you have to stand at the bottom of the crag chatting about it, but it's more just like taking 5 or 10 seconds when you're at every piece, when you're seconding up a route, and like, oh, what did my friend do well there and what didn't they do well and how could that be placed better, and just do 10 seconds every time you get to the piece. And it's like, oh no, actually I would have put the piece there to be better. And just look at those tiny little things, because that's kind of what makes a difference. And when you're self-analyzing, then you get to learn what's good and what's bad.
Yeah, it's a cumulative knowledge. It seems like, you know, it's, as you said, since your teens, you're essentially building this dictionary in your mind on what could go where and how it could work, and did this feel solid, and did I take a fall on this one a few years ago that looks similar to this? And it kind of, you know, it's there's no like set formula, it's just experience, it sounds like. And so for those who are wanting to push their trad grade up, it sounds like just doing more trad climbing, while not like the super sexy exciting answer is just, you know, do more of it, place more gear, follow people up who have placed, second a lot of routes, maybe that are at or above your limit, so you can see how those placements look. I mean, that's how I learned. I mean, I was garbage when I learned it. I'm still garbage, but like my first trad lead, I placed all these nuts thinking like I was so good. I'm like, oh, I'm going to place nuts because nuts are like the harder thing to place. And my buddy follows me up and he's like, congrats on free soloing your first route. Like, it's basically every piece walked out on my way up this, you know, 5.5 in Joshua Tree. But, you know, I learned a lot from that. I was like, okay, well, next time I'm going to place some cams, because my nut placements are not what I thought they were. And, you know, you just learn more of it, and hopefully you pick up some tools along the way.
Yeah, I think, yeah, try not to go up and have all your gear falling out.
Another cautionary tale. Yeah. Place a cam.
So people listening, they're going to want like just one little thing to take away. So something really simple that they can implement. So what I'm going to give them is what I would do. This is what I used to do as a kid when I was at the crag with my parents, was actually just at the bottom of the crag when mum was climbing or dad was climbing, then I would go and practice placing gear just at ground level, and I would try loads of different things, and I would place it, and then I would just like hang off it and play with it and tug on it a bit, and, you know, just, and then seeing what happened with the gear. And I used to do that quite a lot as a kid, just playing about. So the one thing, I would go away and practice all this stuff and different gear placements at ground level, and sit on them, test them, place good ones that you think are good, place bad ones that you think are bad, and then when you place them, rate them, make sure you're rating all of them, and then start building up that bank of knowledge of, oh yeah, that one was good and I did give that an 8, and that one was bad and I did give that one a 3, or this one was actually good and I gave it a 4. Okay, well, why is that? So those are the things: practice at ground level, start rating them, and start testing them. And then you start to build up that knowledge and you can implement it onto the climbs.
Amazing advice. I love that. It's like you've given a clinic or two in your day, Pete, and you've got it all dialed in, which is perfect because I want to talk about this kind of stuff now. Great segue for us to talk about all these cool things that you're working on. You got Wide Boys, you got YouTube content, you've got this global crack school that you're working on, which is part of when we're going to release this episode is I think going to be aligning with around when this project is coming to fruition. Maybe we start there. Tell me about what you got cooking here, because this has been long in the making.
Yeah, so the Global Crack School is something that me and Tom have been thinking about doing for a while. Obviously, a lot of people have heard of Crack School, which is the crack climbing clinics that me and Tom have given for the last 12 to 15 years, I think. Yeah. Essentially teaching all the fundamentals of crack climbing to people, gyms, at festivals around the world. But we're obviously getting so many questions and invites to come and teach crack schools, which we couldn't keep up with, that we had to do something about it. So we've put all that knowledge of crack school and more into an online course, which basically people can access, and they can just get that knowledge from us firsthand in this course. And yeah, it's essentially there to like just level up people's knowledge about crack climbing, so they have that knowledge and then they can go out there and implement it themselves and learn and practice. Because what I feel like or what I see is people want to start crack climbing, but they just don't have the knowledge and they don't know about the techniques to actually get them going or to make those improvements. And because crack climbing is so technique based and it's such a technical aspect, then all you really need is just like do this and this, and then it works. And then you just have to practice it.
And so, so how does the course then break down? Is it progressively laid out for those who are very new to crack climbing and all the way up for those who are quite advanced and wanting to work on more advanced skills? What's the curriculum look like? Yeah,
so it's really guided towards those people who have never crack climbed and want to crack climb, mm-hmm. or the people who are up to a 5'11" standard of crack climbing.
That's pretty high when it comes to crack climbing. Like that's very, I would consider that advanced. I don't know if you would. It's certainly well above my level of crack climbing skills. So yeah, there's quite a bit of coverage there then. Yeah, so basically the people who've never crack climbed, they'll come into it and they're probably not going to take on all the information that's in the course, but they're going to like get the basics and it's going to get them going. And then for those people who already have like a base of crack climbing but want to improve their skills, those are the people that are going to really focus on those intricate details that we go into that are just going to help level up their crack climbing to the next point. I think if you're a 5'12" climber and you're looking at coming onto the course, you're definitely still going to learn some stuff, but you'll also know a lot of the stuff as well. Sure.
And if you're a 5'13" climber, then it may not be for you. It was quite funny actually though, because Tom said after we'd finished filming, he was like, even I've learned some stuff like filming this global crack school. So yeah, it definitely like made us think about different things and the way that jams work and stuff. So
well, if I'm in person with you guys at a crack school, I'm getting that sweet Tom and Pete dynamic, the shenanigans, the O-grading of certain routes and just like the comedy. How much Tom and Pete comedy has been able to be captured into the global crack school?
I would say there's less comedy than on the YouTube videos for sure. Yeah, it's a lot more instructional and information and knowledge. Like we really wanted it to be a resource for people to give them that knowledge. We didn't just want it to be, shenanigans. We really wanted to like help people and give people education.
Right.
So that was like the real main priority.
Well, we can still get the shenanigans over on Wide Boys. But,
Yeah.
but yeah,
Yeah.
in terms of a program for those who are listening right now who are interested in crack climbing, and I got to say, like, I had done a good amount of it in my earliest days of climbing and then have been away from it for quite some time now, being where I'm at the Red River Gorge. But having this day out with Tom that I did recently out in Moab, where we did a crack pitch as well as an inverted off-width boulder. I mean, it was just like I was struggling. It was a total struggle fest, but it was so enjoyable. And there's just quite a bit of satisfaction to seeing like a crack go straight up a rock and just being like, that's what I'm climbing. You know, it's just like so straightforward, and it was like a really beautiful experience. And I was terrible at it and I need to get better. So I think I'm a candidate for Global Crack School because technique really matters. I mean, I was climbing with Tom, so the juxtaposition was about as great as one can get, where he just like floated up this thing and placed like 4 pieces of gear, and I had placed pretty much my entire rack by the time I got halfway up this climb, and was just like barn dooring and my toes were hurting, and it was just like, it was hilarious. And it's just because I think I lacked experience for sure, but also quite a bit of technique. And so how does one learn crack climbing technique? From a video, I can understand. If we're in person, I can see how you're placing your hands and all of that. How did you film this in a way where usually your hands go into a crack or a volume and I can't even, then they're gone. Like, I'm like, oh yeah, they're in there, but I don't really see what you're doing. So how do I watch this course and like actually retain or learn what you're doing?
Yeah, for this course, we did something a little bit differently, actually. And we had a transparent crack. So,
oh, cool.
How we filmed was, we would obviously like explain the techniques, but then when we demonstrated it inside the crack, we filmed it from different angles, so you could actually see like where the pressure is going on the hands, and you can see what the hand is doing inside the crack, which I think is really unique. That's
like a clear volume.
Yeah, like a clear volume, like a perspex volume.
Oh yeah, cool.
Yeah, and I think with crack climbing, it's interesting because such small differences and small subtleties can make a big difference. So you only have to just like tweak things a little bit, and then suddenly you're like, oh yeah, that feels really good. But it's just knowing what those things are to actually tweak and adjust to make it feel good. So
what's the hardest crack climbing technique?
I think it'll be different for everybody, but for me, I would still say ring locks. Mm-hmm. So that's the size in between like paddle hands or thin hands and finger jamming. Yeah, for me, I definitely find those the toughest. And if you put a ring lock crack in a roof, then they would be the hardest cracks, I think. Yeah. I mean, finger cracks are really hard in a roof as well, of course.
Is that the Crucifix Project? Is that the name of it? What was that thing that you guys...
Yeah.
Is that ring locks in a roof?
No, that's fingers. Yeah, that's finger locks, yeah. The problem is with finger locks in a roof is the feet are just absolute garbage, so...
Right.
Yeah.
Where to put your feet.
But in terms of like a technique, I would say ring lock is a tricky one to master.
Is that covered?
Ring locks, yeah.
Yeah, cool.
Yeah, so that's more towards the upper end. So if you're a 5'11" climber looking to go into 5'12", then that whole finger crack chapter is going to be a real key chapter. Also the thin hands and the paddle hands, there's some really good like little nuances in those which are really useful for getting you from that 5'11" to 5'12" grade.
I'm excited for this course. I'm going to take this course. Okay, so how do I do it? Have you guys figured this out yet? Or I'll put a link in the show notes when the episode comes out. But how does one acquire this course?
Yeah, so it's on an online platform, and at the moment we are still building it out. So we're still building the course, but maybe when this goes out, then it'll already be built. But there'll be a week of enrollment, and that'll be. The plan is 23rd of February until the 2nd of March, where people can enroll on the course, and then the course will start on the 3rd of March. And you can just, you sign up to the course, and then you can get into the course, and then you can take the course content. And inside there's be a mixture of video and audio lessons. And then we'll also have like the crack climbing community page as well, where I'll be available for 4 weeks to help answer people's questions as they take the course. You can take the course at your own speed, and you can sort of like recommended time to cover all the content, which isn't too quickly, but you can still get through it, would be around a month. But you know, if you're really keen, you could take it all in a week. If you wanted to take your time, you know, maybe somebody just coming into crack climbing, maybe they would take 8 weeks or 12 weeks, but it doesn't matter. But I can still be there and help them to answer their questions as they take the course.
Yeah, what a cool resource to be able to have you, like personally, to answer questions. I'm sure questions will arise as people are viewing this and then going and trying this out. I've got a crack climbing machine at this gym near me, the gym I go to, Rock Sport, where you can adjust like the width and all that and the angles. So, oh man, dude, you're probably just gonna get a ton of questions from me. I'm gonna be like blowing you up.
Yeah,
like,
fire away like that.
What do I do about my toes hurting so much? What do I do about my toes hurting? This is actually a question that I got from somebody.
I've got an answer for you already.
Okay, so Katerina, here's Katerina, and she says, I'm curious how much pain tolerance Pete views as mental versus physical. So, for example, just thicker skin on the hands or nerves adapting, and if he has done anything to improve pain tolerance other than just repeated exposure. But I'll tell you what, man, I was like 4 moves into this crack with Tom, and like my toes were like at a 10 out of 10 pain level. So yeah, what do you have for me and Katerina here?
Yeah, for toes, I would say a lot of people sort of experience that when they first start crack climbing. I mean, the one key thing that you can do is just wear some slightly oversized pair of shoes and make sure your toes are flat inside the shoes. Also, having a bit of rubber over the top of the foot is also really nice when you start. Having a high top shoe is also really good for the ankles as well, for twisting, because if you do a lot of twisting of the ankle and you're not used to it, then it can feel like you're straining down the side of the ankle. So slightly oversized shoe, nice flat toes inside, a bit of rubber over the toe, and a high top shoe is a really good starting point.
What about socks? Socks or no socks? That's the big question.
You totally can go with socks as well. Yeah. Great. I mean, that's also like a good starting point as well for just a little bit of extra padding and comfort. And then we talk a little bit about this in the course. We have a short lesson about sort of pain in crack climbing and what it's all about. And it kind of comes down to trying to understand whether it's an actual pain, and this is real pain, or whether it's just unfamiliar to you because you've not done crack climbing before, and learning what those two things feel like.
Right.
And understanding what those two things feel like, because a lot of people can come into crack climbing and they put their hand, or especially with the feet initially, they'll put their foot in a crack, they'll turn their foot, and then they'll look at their foot and go, whoa, like, oh, like it's not meant to be like that. And then it looks so weird, or more, it looks like it should be painful, but maybe it's not actually as painful as it potentially looks in the crack. So yeah, it's about being able to distinguish between these two things of, is it actually painful? And maybe it is painful, or is it not painful? And this is the technique, I'm doing it correctly, and I can actually carry on. But and also with crack climbing, if you haven't done it before, there is that thing of going into it and parts of your hands or fingers aren't used to dealing with it and dealing with those types of moves. Right. It's like if you took a friend to the climbing gym, and obviously you're climbing a whole bunch of times a week and you're also training, but if you took a friend who'd never climbed before, take them to the climbing gym, their skin on the front of their hands and their fingertips is all going to give out a lot quicker than it is for you, because you have built up that resistance and you built up calluses on your fingers. And it's the same with crack climbing. If you just jump into crack climbing and try and do the same intensity that me and Tom are doing, then you're going to break yourself because your body just isn't used to it. But if you go in at a much lower level and a much lower intensity and expect your sessions to be shorter, then you can build into it. It's just like that same thing of when you start anything new, you need to build your body into it because it's not necessarily used to it. And just because you might have climbed for a long time, there's different movements in crack climbing. So it's not like your body is necessarily adapted to those.
Yeah, no doubt, as I recently experienced myself. Great advice. Appreciate that. And yeah, man, I'm really psyched on the course. Congratulations on it. I'll make sure I put all the information in the show notes for people who are interested. And of course, if any of the dates change between now at the time that we're recording this and when it's coming out, I'll note that in the show notes as well. Last question for you here. We got to wrap up, but I'm curious, like, what else you have cooking? I mean, you got Wide Boys, you're making great videos. You've got Wide Boys gear, of course, and then you've got your personal climbing objectives and things. What are you psyched on, or what should we keep an eye out for here in 2025?
I guess some things that I'm really excited about is we have 2 Crack Fests this year.
Yeah.
So Crack Fest is our crack climbing event, which is getting all the crack climbing community together, basically. I mean, not all the crack climbing community, but people in the locations that we're doing it. So for the past 4 or 5 years, we've had just one in Sheffield each year, but this year we're doing one in Germany, in Dortmund. And so I'm really excited to see how that goes and kind of get a whole bunch of new people excited about crack climbing and just, show people that crack climbing can be fun at lower levels and high levels. And it's just, it's all really good. So I'm excited about those events. And then what else have I got? I mean, I feel like I've got a lot going on. I've got some trad climbing trips in spring, so a couple of kind of unfinished projects to go and chip away at. And then in the summer, hopefully the weather gets nice and kind of have some big wall projects to do in Norway. So we'll see. It's always tricky in Norway though. You have to have a good season and it's not seeping too much and there's not too many waterfalls.
There's a lot of variables to deal with out there.
Yeah.
Not at all. I mean, you've got, you put up great stuff on your Instagram, of course, and then Wide Boys, the films that come out are so well done and entertaining and really motivating. And then now we got this course to look forward to. Yeah, no shortage of Pete Whittaker impressive projects coming our way in 2025, man. Congratulations on everything you're doing. I'm so glad we finally made this happen. We're able to connect here. This has just been such a delightful interview. I'm really, really hyped. And I just appreciate the conversation, man.
Yeah, likewise. And I also just want to say thanks very much for the podcast. I've been listening for a number of years, and I really enjoy it, and I can understand the effort that you put into it because I know what these things are like to kind of produce this content and all that kind of stuff. So it's really good, the stuff that you're putting out. So I appreciate that as well. So thanks.
Oh, dude, thank you so much for saying that. That was really, really kind of you to do. And we're going to have you on 4 or 5 more times here to equalize the ratio with Tom. But this was a great start.
All right, y'all, that wraps up this one with Pete Whittaker. Man, what a dude. I'm so glad we got to connect. It's been a long time in the making, but so worth it. Pete, thanks, man. Thank you for taking so much time to not only share all those incredible insights and stories here, but also to share some more in our bonus episode, which I'll tell you guys about in just a second. But first, I'm going to give a shout out to the Global Crack School, which we just talked about there for a little while. And man, that is going to be like the friggin' course. So if anybody's interested in that, I'm going to put a link in the show notes. Check out Global Crack School. I am going to take it. I got out on Rock not too long ago with Tom Randall. You guys may have seen Struggling with Tom Randall, the YouTube video that came out. And talk about struggle. I was definitely struggling, and I could have used some of these Global Crack School techniques for that. So Pete and Tom, good work on that. I'm excited to check it out. And if you guys want to as well, then take a look at that link in the notes. And I'll link to some other things that Pete's been working on in there. He's busy. He's busy over at Wide Boys and all the stuff that he does on YouTube. And, I told you guys about this bonus episode. I'm just going to drop a bunch of names here because this is like a name-droppy bonus episode. And that's okay because Pete is a name himself and he spends a lot of time out there with the best rock climbers in the world. So we talked a lot about his learnings as he spent time on rock and just hanging out with his longtime partner, Tom Randall. And in fact, we got some listener questions in about that relationship. One of them was like, hey, what's your least favorite thing about Tom? So we push Pete to dig in on Tom a little bit here in the bonus episode. Then we talk about the future of Wide Boys and what's going on over there. And okay, let me drop some other names here. Alex Honnold, Adam Andra, Magnus Mitbo. Those are a few of the names that come up in this bonus episode on what Pete has learned from those guys and what those guys have learned from Pete, actually. It's been a nice two-way street. We also talk about a little bit of a, I don't know if this is a hot topic or not within climbing. Chris Kalous and Andrew Bisharat, I think, talked about this on the Run Out a little while ago after Babsy flashed the freerider route on El Cap. It was brought up that maybe actually Pete was the first to flash that route on El Cap, but there's a bit of an asterisk. And so I just asked Pete about it, and we break it down. Did he flash? Did he not flash? What does one consider a flash? Whatever it is, however you define it, it's freaking crazy what Pete did on El Cap. And it really just he's done some really impressive things on big walls all over the place, from Mirror Wall in Greenland to El Cap and Half Dome and the rope solos that he's done. As I noted at the beginning of this thing, the humility is crazy. He's just out there doing such impressive stuff, and not all of it gets the coverage that it probably deserves, or there's just so much that he's doing. There's such a volume that we're oh yeah, I guess he did that, and now he's done 10 other things, so I already forgot about that. But anyway, we talk about some of those things in this bonus episode, and we also get to some listener questions, and it's really good. You can get instant access to all of that right now at zero cost, actually, with a free trial over at patreon.com/The Struggle Climbing Show, or right there in your Apple Podcast player if you are an iPhone person. And you're also going to get instant access to more than 100 hours of other bonus content featuring the best of the best. I'm talking about Adam Andra, Chris Sharma, Nina Williams, Alex Honnold, Magnus Mitbo, and so many more athletes and coaches that have been on the show here. Plus, pro clinics on stronger fingers with Dr. Tyler Nelson, advanced bouldering with Allison Vest, moonboard with Ravioli Biceps, performance hacks with Hazel Finley, and so many more. It's all there for just a few bucks a month, or actually zero cost right now with that free trial, so you can try it before you buy it. Although, honestly, your support as patrons and subscribers is really what helps to keep this thing going. So if you got a few bucks, I certainly would appreciate your help as I'm jamming away here in the podcast/utility closet. Thank you. I love you. Big thanks and appreciation to all of our show sponsors who have brought you this episode here at zero cost. Way to go. You can check your show notes for links and special discounts from those guys that are only available to Struggle listeners, and there's some great discounts there, so check them all out. Actually, you can see all of the show's brand sponsors and special deals by popping over to thestruggleclimbingshow.com/deals. Hey, did you know that The Struggle is carbon neutral in partnership with the Honnold Foundation? Well, you do now, and it feels pretty good for me to write that check every month. They're doing such amazing work to bring clean energy to communities around the world. Y'all can get inspired and learn more about their amazing work over at honnoldfoundation.org, and toss them some love if you can. They're doing awesome stuff. And lastly, The Struggle is a proud member of the Plugtone Audio Collective, a diverse group of the best, most impactful podcasts in the outdoor industry. The show is produced and hosted by me, Ryan Devlin, and edited by the wonderful Glenn Walker. All right, that clips the anchors on this episode. Thank you so much for tuning in and supporting the show. If you want to do something that helps me out for zero cost, you could rate and review the show wherever you listen, or just share this with one of your climbing friends or the gym that you climb at. It really helps to get the word out there. I appreciate it. I hope your training and climbing are going great, and if you are struggling like me, well, just remember the struggle makes us stronger.